You are ready. That Rob.
We're both ready.
Okay, good afternoon, and welcome to the Winnetka Village Council Emergency Meeting for March 17th, 2020 at 3 p.m. I'd like to call the meeting to order and request that everybody in the room please turn off or mute your cell phones or other electronic devices, and I will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I will now open the podium to public comment. There is no one in attendance outside of village staff and elected officials, but public comment is now open. And seeing that nobody has elected to address the council, I will close public comment. I also wanted to say, just to start, that the reasons why we're having this meeting are number one, to conduct important village business, to make sure that village staff can continue to provide the necessary services and assistance that the public may need, and also to ensure that our vendors are taken care of appropriately. There's a lot of crunch going on out there in the economy, and we wanted to make sure that we weren't part of the problem in that respect. So we'll move forward with the warrant list. Are there? We're going to just vote on it, Rob? I'm sorry. Okay. Number 4, approval of the warrant list. May I have a motion to approve the warrant list dated February 21 through March 1st in the amount of $283,343.12.
Second.
Roll call vote.
Trustee Caladarchi? Yes. Trustee Kripe?
Yes.
Trustee Swerk?
Yes.
Trustee Apatow?
Yes.
Carries.
Motion carries. Thank you. Item 5, ordinances and resolutions. 5A, resolution number R34-2020, a resolution approving a policy concerning attendance at village meetings by video or audio conference. The emergent situation with COVID-19 outbreak has prompted the village to review its policy for electronic attendance at public meetings. The village attorney has revised the policy and will review with us today. Peter Friedman, our village attorney, is here to provide us with additional information.
Thank you. So 2 things to keep in mind, just 2 fundamental Open Meetings Act requirements. One is that ordinarily a quorum needs to be physically present at all meetings. We'll talk about that in a minute. Secondly, that in order for there to be electronic participation, there are requirements in the Open Meetings Act for that participation, but one of those requirements is that each municipality have a written policy that they locally can require electronic participation. As you all know, the village does not have a policy for electronic participation. As directed by the board, we prepared this policy that authorizes electronic participation, not only in emergency situations, but in day-to-day normal situations. This policy is not limited to the circumstance we find ourselves in today with regard to the state of emergency and the declarations that have been made by both the President and the Governor. But I will say that at the time we prepared this, at the time you directed us to prepare it and the time we prepared it was prior to yesterday, when the Governor issued an executive order that suspended the requirement that there be physically present a quorum at all public meetings. So that has now been suspended. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. But for purposes of this policy, as I said, it is a standard policy to allow for electronic participation under 3 very specific situations. When a member is unable to participate because of personal illness or disability, because of employment reasons, their employment reasons if they have to be out of town, or business of the public body. If a member is doing something for the public body, that is also an excused absence, allowing electronic participation, or for a family or other emergency. This policy specifically is limited to authorize no more for each member of the public body, no more than 4 electronic participations per term of each elected officer. The procedures are straightforward. There's a requirement that if trustee or a member of the public body is wants to participate electronically, they should notify the clerk. The clerk will then notify the village president. At the meeting, once a quorum is determined to be physically present, the village president will note the request, will note that the request will be deemed to be granted unless there is a motion to disallow electronic participation by a 2/3 vote. If the motion fails, or if the motion is not even made, then that member will be present for all purposes of the meeting. So at a meeting, there'll be a roll call and a quorum taken. The village president will recognize that there's an electronic attendee. The key aspects of it are the person participating electronically and the public both have to be able to hear each other. And any votes taken, the person participating will have to be very clear how they are voting, and the village president and the clerk will have to make that clear in the minutes. And so that's the procedure. Happy to answer any questions. It can be adopted by resolution, and it is specifically, again, not related to the existing emergency and the governor's executive order.
Great. Thanks, Peter. Any questions for Peter?
The non-emergency aspect of this, how many, so if somebody's missing for business, they can do it 4 times over a 2-year term, in our case. Is there a limitation on the number of people who can be using this during one meeting?
In a normal situation outside of where we are today, it would be 3, because a quorum will need to be physically present.
So 3 could be, okay, so 3 non-quorum members could be calling in, all the rest.
Correct.
Is, when you say, when the law defines electronic means, it is not including by text message or by email, right?
Correct.
It has to be an actual back and forth.
Correct. Either by video or telephone.
And then during an emergency, the declaration of an emergency, we're allowed to do, again, I'm sorry, are we talking about that yet, or is that next?
No, but I'll answer the question. Only during this emergency has that been suspended. The governor's executive order yesterday is very specific to this emergency, not any emergency. There have been previous emergencies after 9/11. That provision was not suspended. The governor suspended it now, specifically related to this emergency, because this emergency prevents people from being physically present.
Oh, the presence of an infectious disease, right? I mean,
Correct.
So a different fact.
Yep.
And again, I'm trying to run through it and I keep forgetting parts. Is there any ability, you may have already said this, to have a meeting that is electronic only, an emergency meeting where it's either by video or audio, if it becomes too dangerous even to do what we're doing now?
Under the current executive order, that is possible. But another emergency and another day, there would need to be another executive order.
So we don't lose, the public doesn't lose the ability to oversee us forever?
Correct.
It's just during this emergency only?
Right, and I would say the executive order did not suspend, as the village president said, the doors are open, the public has been invited, the public could speak today too. So the access, this is not a closed meeting, this is an open meeting. That was not suspended by the executive order.
And the public's allowed to take part electronically as well?
Correct.
I'm just, and again, this may be more than I need to ask, I'm just curious, how will they handle that? If we have 50 people calling in or participating electronically?
It can be done. There are other municipalities who are having completely electronic meetings this week.
Yeah.
They're sending out information the public can call in. Some of them are doing video, but it can be done.
Are we able to do that? Well, I guess that's right, colleges do it all the
Yeah,
time.
we're speaking to classes of 50 that are all separately tuned in with their pictures, and when they start speaking, their picture comes up bigger.
Right.
So, yeah, it's Zoom, it's usually called Zoom, but
Right.
yeah, it's
Zoom's
very
great.
doable.
We're looking at Zoom now. We're not there yet, but we're looking at it.
I hosted a 60-person video conference on Zoom earlier today, actually.
Wow.
It's flawless. It's really good.
And if we have an electronic meeting like that, it gets recorded the same way that this one does?
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Does this apply to all lower boards and commissions?
It does.
Good, thanks. That's all I have.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I got two things. I think it's, I mean, oh, no, you're fine. Well, obviously, we should all strive to be here at every meeting. There are 36 meetings, 3 a month, 36 a year, maybe special meetings. How is, I guess my thought was if somebody can't, I guess I'm trying to distinguish, if you're not here for 3 or, if you can't be here for illness or whatever for 4 meetings, I mean, you're just talking about we have ability 4 in the 2-year term. So you're talking 4 and 72, at least 72 meetings. And I guess that's, how is that number arrived at, or should we?
Well, it's interesting, Rob. The previous, this has been dealt with previous councils, and there's always been a very cautious and
Oh, yeah.
conservative approach to this. And this falls under the category of baby steps.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that are uncomfortable with any. And so it really is a big step for this village to allow outside attendance. And, you know, again, we want to make sure that we can accommodate people to a certain degree and see how it works. And clearly, if there's, you know, the nice thing about what we do up here is if it doesn't seem to be working, we can always change it.
Of course.
But it was my sense in talking with the village attorney and the village manager that we should be, again, cautious and conservative and reflective of the previous conversations and
Yeah.
take it one step at a time.
Yeah, I get that, and that's why I try to look at the absolute number and what does that make sense. But I'd rather have Jack or John or Andrew, I'd rather have their point of view remotely versus not at all, because they're on their 5th versus their 4th.
I'll admit, it's been a source of frustration sometime not to have a voice that
Right.
you really need in a conversation. And clearly, this will give us the opportunity to at least see how that works.
Yeah, I think it's a great first step. I mean,
Yeah.
it's good to get it out there.
I agree.
Okay.
Andy, anything?
No, I agree. I think it's the right move.
Okay, and I will point out once again that there are no members of the public attending the meeting, so I won't be asking for public comment on this issue. So I'll move ahead and ask that we have a motion to adopt resolution number R34, 2020.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call vote.
Trustee Kripe?
Yes.
Trustee Apatow?
Yes.
Trustee Caladarchi?
Yes.
Trustee Swerk?
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you. Next item, item B, is ordinance number MC2, 2020, an ordinance amending section 3.32.010 of the Winnetka Village Code regarding civil emergencies. This is up for introduction and possible adoption. These are proposed code amendments to better define the emergency powers of the village president as defined by the state statute. And again, we'll have our village attorney, Peter Friedman, run through the high points.
So we prepared a memo that was included in the packet. The village does have a civil emergency provision of the village code, section 3.32.010. As we, you know, it was drafted in another time, and as we've looked at a number of communities, similar provisions, they've all needed to be updated. We tried to use a scalpel, and rather than unnecessarily rewriting provisions. So I think it's easiest to talk about the scope of what we did as 3 specific things. One, we just wanted to make sure that the definition of a civil emergency included the situation we are operating in today, and so therefore we added language that that includes within the definition of a civil emergency the appearance of a novel or previously controlled infectious agent or biological toxin. And there are other language that, again, without mistake, will include the COVID-19 situation we're in today. And so there were amendments to make sure those definitions were clear. The second thing we did was the current code has almost a catch-all provision for the village president to operate in an emergency situation. We felt that it was a more transparent code to specifically list out the types of powers that the president could, in an emergency, exercise. They are, by definition, extreme provisions, things such as curfews, prohibition on gasoline and other liquid flammable sales, the closure of businesses, closure of public streets, calling out regular and auxiliary law enforcement agencies, none of which the village president is exercising today in the declaration that we will talk about. There are some that the village president is. They are very limited, but it was important, we thought, to list them all in the code. That does not mean they are being exercised by the village president. We also thought it was important to, again, from a legal standpoint, to include a reference to the provision in the Illinois Municipal Code that specifically authorizes the village council to authorize the village president to exercise powers that would normally be exercised in a normal situation, be exercised by the village council. In an emergency, the village council, just like the Congress, just like the General Assembly, cannot act as quickly as the head of the public body. And so there are provisions that specifically authorize the council to authorize the president to act. We wanted that provision to be in the Winnetka Code so that the powers were as broad as they could be potentially, even though the village president is not exercising those broad powers specifically. So that's basically the code. There is a couple of things I would add. With regard to the term of any declaration, it specifically provides that it is 7 days or until the adjournment of the next regular meeting. That's a protection against, or not against, that's a limit on the village president's power, so that whichever comes first, if the council does meet again within 7 days, then any declaration that the president has made will expire unless the council at that meeting allows it to continue, or it expires after 7 days. We have recommended a motion that the council can make after these code amendments are adopted and after the emergency declaration is signed that would allow, since it doesn't appear that we'll be meeting again within 7 days, that would allow the declaration to continue beyond the 7 days, but no later, again, than the next adjournment of the next village council meeting, whenever that may be, whether it's a regular, a special, or an emergency meeting. The other final point I'll make is that there are restrictions and limitations inherent in the power. For example, the civil emergency that we're talking about must be in the village, and the authorities are limited to the elimination and minimization and dangers and protection of the public health and safety. The village president, and not this village president, this is any village president, the village president does not have the authority under this to go out and buy new copiers or to go out and enact new laws that have absolutely nothing to do with the current emergency. The powers are specific to what is necessary to address and alleviate the emergency to the extent possible. There's also the term of the proclamation that I've talked about. There is always the ability of the council to call a meeting and revoke a proclamation, amend this code to limit the village president's authority. So this is not a code amendment that cannot be reversed if the village council ever determines that that is necessary. And I also think trustee Kripe may have a change to some of the language in the code that would more clarify the direction of the power that's being granted to the village president.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. It's real simple. It's not even adding anything. It's just moving some words from one spot to another and making clear the context. So it's subsection 3 on page 14 of your agenda packet. It says, orders of the village president may, upon the issuance of a declaration of civil emergency in accordance with subsections blah, 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 issue orders to implement any of the following, and then there's a list. The first item in that list, A, has at the end of it, A provides for the ability to impose a curfew, but at the end of it, it notes, as deemed necessary by the village president in the interest of the public safety and welfare, which of course is the context of all of these powers. So my suggestion is we take that clause and move it up as just between some commas at the start of 3, so that 3 would now read, orders of the village president may, comma, upon the issuance of a declaration of civil emergency in accordance with subsection 3.32.010.j.2, comma, so this is where I'm adding, as deemed necessary by the village president in the interest of the public safety and welfare, comma, issue orders to implement any of the following, colon. And I've got that change in writing in an uninfected document, but you've got it as well, so we're good to go. So that's my only suggestion there.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
One question I have, if the president is incapable for some reason, is there a second person in charge at that point?
Pro tem.
Yeah. Say that, I'm sorry, I didn't.
If for some reason the president is not capable or out of the country or cannot do his duty, who takes care of that?
Yeah, I would think it was
position?
the village pro tem, and if necessary, the council would come back and reauthorize a specific individual to do it.
Okay.
Is there a limit, so if we pass it, or if the president takes an action under emergency power, is that have a sunset provision to it, the action? Is there a reason to create that so that we don't get a liberty limitation creep where that just keeps continuing?
The sunset would be the same sunset as the declaration itself. So it would either be 7 days or until the next meeting.
So any acts that he takes as president to impose a curfew, the curfew would only be for 7-day time periods as reauthorized?
Correct.
Probably unless we make a point to extend it
Correct.
to
Right.
something else, right?
Which I have a motion I'd like to make
Yeah.
when, at the right time.
Right.
Is there any sense to putting a terminal point at the powers? In other words, so it doesn't, and again, I've probably watched too many zombie apocalypse movies, but where the president doesn't, where you don't, we don't just keep reauthorizing, and 6 months later, it's still not as bad as it was, but there's still, through either oversight or busyness or whatever, we just sort of, well, let's just generally authorize that until we terminate it. Is that likely to be an outcome where
Well,
we authorize things just continuously with no sunset?
If you meet and adjourn, then the proclamation is terminated without any action of the village council. It does not require any action. Once you meet and adjourn, then any proclamations that have been issued, even under the motion that trustee Kripe is going to make, then it terminates without any action. You don't need to take any. You probably would, to be explicit about it, but it's specifically written that once the council meets again, then that's the council's opportunity to do something if it wants to do something, and if it chooses not to do something, then the authority to issue the proclamation that's been issued will terminate. And then the village president would have to issue another proclamation if he wanted to, or he or she wanted to continue the emergency.
Right. And in between meetings, our code has always had the provision of at least three trustees can call a meeting. They have to provide notice to the village clerk, and then a meeting would be called.
Does that three trustee provision operate under the electronic?
Yes,
Under the current.
under any circumstance, 3 trustees can call a meeting.
So there are checks and balances in the system inherently in terms of when you meet, the declaration would expire, or if you felt like you needed to meet, you could do so with notice.
Just don't want Chris to declare me a public nuisance and have me marched off.
Well, maybe.
We don't need an emergency declaration for that.
Can I
To
impose,
be clear.
can I impose a curfew if I don't like my daughter's boyfriend? Is it power reach there?
That's a reasonable thing, yeah.
That makes sense, though, this whole thing.
Any other questions for Peter or Rob on this? Again, there are no members of the public in attendance, so we'll move forward. I guess the first order of business is to ask if we have the
You can just,
appetite.
I'm sorry, if there's going to be a motion to approve the ordinance, if it could be a motion to approve the ordinance as amended with trustee Kripe's additional language.
So moved.
Second.
Sorry.
That, we should probably do this all by roll call vote, Rob.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yep,
Roll call vote.
okay. Trustee Caladarchi?
Aye.
Trustee Kripe?
Yes.
Trustee Swerk?
Yes.
Trustee Apatow?
Yes.
That motion carries.
That's introduction.
Yep.
Yep. That was waiver.
Okay, now we have
Adopt.
the adopt, I have a motion to adopt ordinance number MC 2020, and I would like trustee Kripe to read his modifications to the original.
Sure. So the ordinance as amended would amend subsection Roman numeral 1(3), so that it will read as follows in the introductory paragraph. Orders of the village president, period. The village president may, comma, upon the issuance of a declaration of civil emergency in accordance with subsection 3.32.010.j.2, comma, as deemed necessary by the village president in the interest of the public safety and welfare, comma, issue orders to implement any of the following, colon, and then the further amendment would be to delete the language that I just added to that introductory paragraph from subpart A. So subpart A under 3 would end with day or night, semicolon, and just take out the as deemed necessary by the village president in the interest of the public safety and welfare.
Gotcha. Do we need an amendment on the amendment?
No.
No, okay, so we can move forward. All right, we may have a motion to adopt ordinance number MC 2020.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call vote?
Trustee Swerk?
Yes.
Trustee Caladarchi?
Yes.
Trustee Apatow?
Yes.
Trustee Kripe?
Yes.
That motion carries. Item C, village president executes a declaration of emergency. And Peter will once again review this.
So, village president has before him an emergency declaration dated March 17th. To summarize, it provides 3 specific directions. One, regarding entering into contracts for the emergency purchase of goods and services that may be necessary for the preparation for, response to, and recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. The village president and the manager are authorized to execute such contracts in accordance with applicable law. Number 2, declaration is a civil emergency and directs the village manager to implement such emergency staffing protocols and procedures as may be necessary. And number 3, generally authorizes and directs the village officials and employees to take all steps to coordinate the village's resources and emergency operations with state, county, federal, and local governments in and around the village to prepare for, respond to, and recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. As I said before, the declaration, once signed by the village president, will be, and by the way, that's a signature that is under oath. The village seal will be attached and affixed. The declaration will be subsequent, or subject to further motion by trustee Kripe. The declaration will be in effect until the adjournment of the next regular meeting of the corporate authorities, or 7 days after the date of today's date. But the corporate authorities can extend that by motion. So if you are comfortable with it, it is appropriate for you to sign the declaration at this time. It does not require a vote of the village council.
Okay, I am comfortable. There's no need to read this into the record or anything like that, right?
No, there's not.
And the declaration has been executed.
Okay.
And then I would like to make a motion. I move that the duration of the declaration of civil emergency executed by the village president on this date and any additional emergency regulations and orders in furtherance of that declaration shall be extended until the date that is 7 days from the date of this motion or until the adjournment of the next regular, special, or emergency meeting of the council, whichever occurs later.
Okay, Peter, you want to give us a quick,
So this is, as I said previously, this is a motion to allow for the declaration that you've just signed to continue until the later of 7 days or the next regular meeting, a regular special or emergency meeting of the council. And specifically to the question that was asked, this relates to the duration of a declaration and any orders in furtherance of that declaration. The expiration would be 7 days, the later of 7 days from today's date, or the next regular special emergency meeting of the council.
And again, the reason for my motion is without it, that declaration and any orders in support of it go away after 7 days.
And again, the meetings that cover this can be electronic, so if things get bad and we're all quarantined in place, we can call in and have our meeting electronically at that point to review whether we need to grant more powers or terminate or whatever.
Correct. So there's a motion, we need a second, and it then requires a roll call.
Motion made by trustee Kripe, seconded by trustee Caladarchi.
roll call vote?
Trustee Kripe.
Yes.
Trustee Caladarchi.
Yes.
Trustee Apatow.
Yes.
Trustee Swerk.
Yes.
That motion carries. Item 6, old business, there is none. Item 7, new business, there is none. And item 8, adjournment. May I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Voice vote, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries, we are adjourned. Thank you.